Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Ted, hanging out with the full crew today.
Ryan.
Nate.
Dave.
And today we got a GM 911 from Cameron, the Aussie DM, and he's setting up a brand new campaign for D&D 5e, and he wants to have his campaign themed off of the 7 deadly sins, and they're a bunch of Aasimar Warlocks. But he wants to know what's the best way to tie in the low-level adventures into this whole overarching campaign thread. So what do you got?
Well, so he's talking about also specifically, he gave us some anecdotes where he's talking about greed and what was the other? Envy for the early ones.
As possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, he gave some anecdotes about having, like, say, a tribe of kobolds bullied into committing a bunch of petty thefts to acquire.
There will also be a slave ring tribe, working in there as well. But those are ideas that he's got. What's the best way to get the theme of these 7 deadly sins into the early game without exposing his whole grand plan?
Well, I don't know that it's so much that he wants the theme as much as he wants to give this overarching impression that someone is behind what's going on.
The puppet master.
And for that, you're going to need breadcrumbs. You're going to have these little pieces of information.
There's maybe they each have their own serif sigil that they're using that represents the deadly sins. And maybe they find that it could be
they need like sprinkles of those tokens, those symbols.
Yeah, it could be wax seals, it could be coins, it could be a heraldry or a signet ring.
I like the idea of of using that symbol, and if they're using something seraph, you could have it slightly twisted so that when actually somebody looks at it, it's like, well, this looks like this, angelic thing, so people think it's something good, but it's slightly twisted to represent the opposite, so that
it's like turning the tines of a swastika, because it used to be a Buddhist symbol for good luck, and then post-Hitler Germany, they just flipped it, and it became known as what it is now.
Greed and envy are kind of easy ones, to be honest with you, just for the simple fact that, like, envy, the opposite of that would be wanting everyone to be envious of you, and maybe they want to instill that, so maybe they want to constantly show proof that I own all this stuff. An example of the kobold tribe, perhaps like they're ritually branded and they all have this mark on them.
Or the slaves that they're taking would have those brands on them, because I'm sure if you're terrible enough to keep slaves, you're also probably terrible enough to brand human flesh.
Right.
So there's that.
And greed would be the same way. One is going, hey, look how much better than I am than the rest of you guys, and the other one's going, mine. Yeah. So I mark everything.
And not too far removed from greed, if somebody is depleting the food resources, that could be your next step, and that would go towards gluttony. So I think
it could be, and I also don't think gluttony has to just be food either.
Well, you could have somebody, that one could be demanding tribute, so it could be very obvious that like gluttonous of resources. In general, too. Well, no, I think actually gluttony is kind of specific towards. Well, it definitely is excess, but I always imagined that gluttony was kind of specifically consumption.
That's the easiest form of excess that people, especially people 1,000 years ago, could associate with. It's like, well, eating more food than everybody. Basically, like someone else is not eating because you are eating
horrendously, morbidly obese type of thing. Job at the high level. So.
Yeah, so really, it's like these guys said. You're really just leaving the breadcrumbs, and you just have to agree on certain things that are going to keep popping up again and again, so your players can see it and go
make patterns for them.
Yes, well, I keep seeing this thing. Like the first time they see it, it may not mean anything to them, right? They bust up the tribe of kobolds, and they find this mark, and then they bust up the slave ring, and they find it again. So now there's a pattern.
Right.
Now, I would say, if I was doing this, I would do one at a time. Because if they just keep finding these marks and they're always different, you're going to confuse them.
Maybe maybe sometimes they butt against two of them just because like maybe you want a bit of confusion. You know, it's like the series where say it's a show and you have like the climax of the show, the season, the finale or whatever. But like sometimes there's like those side tributary episodes that like you kind of want them to maybe veer off the path a little bit, maybe stretch out your grand arc. Or it depends on how much time you feel like you have to run this game too, because sometimes games fall apart because you have 7 deadly sins, which means you want them to uncover all 7 of them, and enough of your players move or have something else come up that maybe you wanted to rush that conclusion a little earlier than, say, if you knew you had like 2 years to run this campaign.
I think Dave's going with you know, run at least 3 or so encounters with that theme of like one thing.
You need to look at. Besides, you don't have to do each one individually. Like I took it as it's a cabal of warlocks that are working together and themed off of these 7 things. If you get, you know, you find one trail that leads to the one deadly sin, and not necessarily that not the warlock himself, but someone high in the organization, and you get that one to crack, then they might know of the other ones and the cabal that operates together as a whole.
Right.
You know, so you don't really have to uncover each one individually, in my opinion.
And I was thinking with the angelic symbols, you could also look at synonyms, so you don't say like, oh, you know, by the second guy, you're like, oh, these are the 7 deadly sins because it's greed and envy. Right. You know, I would say that, you know, either greed, you know, could be turned into desire, or wanting the
less obvious
wealth.
words.
Other words. Like I would definitely use
steer away from
synonyms.
Using the obvious, like avarice.
But in the end, when they have a few of them, you could say, you know, you're starting to realize a pattern that these are celestial symbols for words, but they don't directly translate because they're a little off, and they're a little off because they're these extreme viewpoints.
Desire is actually a good one because that kind of crosses the thresholds a little bit.
Yeah, and I would also do research. Like, don't just go with, oh, well, I know the names of the 7 deadly sins, so I know everything about them, and just go from there. Like branch it out so all the encounters aren't just like super obvious. Like,
thematic.
If
things.
all you can think of for lust is a brothel, then you know you got to develop your understanding of lust a little more than that. So I would just like go to religious texts on the subject. There's tons of stuff written on the 7 deadly sins and problems with them and why they're called that in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the other thing too is it depends on how much you want to make them work to find out what's going on, or whether that's not really the payoff. Like, you don't really care about that. You know, if you want them within the first handful of adventures, you want them to think, oh, deadly sins, it's completely okay to not, you know, mislead them or throw red herrings in there. So they're chasing down, you know, something different. It all depends on what the DM's specific goal is. You know, if he wants the theme to come out early, then maybe you just use the 7 deadly sins. And, you know, some people might get it right away, and some people still might not get it right away. I mean, you know, players are, you know, notorious for, you know, throwing a monkey wrench in your plans either way. By either, you know, figuring something out that you never thought they would have figured out, or by, like, missing the obvious.
Yeah, like I have a word that rhymes with hat. Go.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't figure it out.
Well, also,
it's very in 4 limbs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is too, like, when you're the GM, you have absolutely all the information, so it all seems obvious to you because you have the picture of the puzzle and all the pieces. Whereas, like, all right, you gave them a bunch of pieces, but they don't have the picture to go off of. So, I mean, just sometimes that's something that tends to happen. Like, you might sprinkle things in, but they're not devouring the breadcrumbs.
Because they're also looking at all the other extraneous pieces of information, and they're not certain what to include and what not.
Right.
So
the one puzzle's from the cat puzzle, and it's not to the puzzle to do the landscape. So yeah.
But that's why I'm not worried about too overly obvious. You know, you know, because sometimes we get wrapped up in putting these things together as GMs, and we end up making this thing that the players can't figure out, or we hinge it on a die roll. Worst decision ever. For things to go forward. You know, really just think about the story you want to tell.
Right.
And use those elements to tell that story. You know, if you're absolutely have your heart set on one of them to figure out it's the 7 deadly sins, you don't have to make it that difficult.
Yeah.
If your objective is to make them not figure it out for later until later in the game, then yeah, you can do some things.
You could also, I mean, Nate was talking about drawing influence from like a religious text and also Dante's Inferno, like the whole layers, and I'm sure there's a wiki breaking down the sections, like talking about what happened there. You could like lift some of that, steal liberally from all those types of sources.
The work is done for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But now it's just a matter of putting the breadcrumbs into place and really just deciding which aspects you want to introduce first. Create a common denominator for several different encounters or scenes. Put it in there, and then the players will have something to work with.
Indeed.
So with that, I think this is covered. You guys can check it out in the comments below. While you're at it, like, share, and subscribe.
You can check us out on nerdarchy.com.
While you're at nerdarchy.com, you can check out Nerdarchy, the store.
Also check out Funny Memes over on Facebook.
So until next time, stay nerdy. Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Ted, hanging out with the full crew today.
Ryan.
Nate.
Dave.
And today we got a GM 911 from Cameron, the Aussie DM, and he's set well. But those are ideas that he's got. What's the best way to get the theme of these 7 deadly sins into the early game without exposing his whole grand plan?
Well, I don't know that it's so much that he wants the theme as much as he wants to give this overarching impression that someone is behind what's going on.
Puppet master.
Up a brand new campaign for D&D 5e, and he wants to have his campaign themed off of the 7 deadly sins, and there are a bunch of Aasimar Warlocks. But he wants to know what's the best way to tie in the low-level adventures into this whole overarching campaign thread. So what do you got?
Well, so he's talking about also specifically, he gave us some anecdotes where he's talking about greed and what was the other? Envy for the early ones.
As possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, he gave some anecdotes about having, like, say, a tribe of kobolds bullied into committing a bunch of petty thefts to acquire.
There will also be a slave ring tribe, working in there.
And
for that, you're going to need breadcrumbs. You're going to have these little pieces of information.
There's maybe they each have their own serif sigil that they're using that represents the deadly sins. And maybe they find that it could be
they need like sprinkles of those tokens, those symbols.
Yeah, it could be wax seals.